This is all about Robert Gottliebsen, who one of those people where you say you would need no introduction, but I will give a very brief one for Robert. Robert probably is the person who created financial news commentary in this country as we know it. As George said earlier, he created the Chanticleer column in The Australian. He's the founder of Business Review Weekly, which ran for, how many years before? 20 years. He's been a long-time columnist for The Australian, where he still writes 5 days a week to this day, writing on all things from markets to business to submarines to industrial relations to you name it. If you ever watch the financial commentary on ABC News at the end of the bulletin, that was started by Robert back in the day. In fact, Robert was parodied wonderfully by Ernie Dingo once upon a time because he had a financial news TV program on Channel 10, I recall, wasn't it? Yes. Yeah. And he pretty much pioneered commentary in this country in terms of financial commentary. He also has the distinction of being my first boss. Robert hired me when I just came out of university in 2000. And I was his producer on a business program on Sky News for many years, and he and I have been probably best mates, pretty much ever since then, and a few Essendon games along the way. And he has to leave early to get back to Melbourne to watch Essendon lose to the Swans, I expect. Or not, hopefully, you never know, we'll see. So listen, the topic today is about the rise of sort of right-wing parties, particularly, and this sort of idea came around, particularly off the back of what we'd seen in the European parliamentary elections in France. And at the time, obviously, Trump was very much in ascendancy in the US elections. Things have changed somewhat since we originally came up with this concept, but I think certainly the concepts that we were talking about at the start of that still exist. So if you think about the context of what we're talking about today, it is you've had this sort of push into things like ESG, into corporate social responsibility, that's sort of leading to some of these changes to regulations like financial reporting in terms of the environment, etc. And that's driving a whole bunch of investment decisions that affect agriculture, all the way from, how does Coles report its carbon numbers and how does that get fed down to farmers and back up into the accounting system, to how is that influencing investors to invest in agriculture because of the issues around food security, issues around are you able to do regenerative agriculture, etc. Now, these rules have been set up and put in place, and they sort of happened somewhat in a political vacuum, if you think about it, in the sense that they were all happening at the high level, global accounting firms, global law firms, parliamentarians, policymakers, etc. And all those things are now coming back down to the farming level and back down to the company level. This lunch is the media lunch, so we're not going to talk about all those rules in a hardcore policy sense. We're going to talk about them in the sense of all these things are part of a continuum of people's expectations about what their government should do, and a lot of that's driven by media interpretations of how that works, and then how consumers at the far end of it consume their media, and then how they also interact with their politicians and their governments. So Robert, as an observer of governments, of economics, of policy for half a century, is probably very well placed to talk about kind of how a lot of these kind of policy ideas get sort of pushed up and then pushed down into the community. So we're going to start off with a bit of a contextualisation of the rise of right-wing parties, or where we are at from a political standpoint globally, bring that back to Australia, bring that back to the farming sector, and then kind of touch on some other issues there. We should do about 35 minutes of that, and we've got questions at the end for those of you who want. So that's my introduction by way of how we go. Robert, let's start with the kind of generic concept of we have seen the rise of right-wing parties partly as a backlash to progressive policies that have been put in place by governments across Europe, in the US and here. Just sort of talk about the conditions that have sort of led to the backlash that we saw when it came to, let's say, Trump, let's say what we saw in kind of the European parliamentary elections, particularly when kind of Marine Le Pen sort of, did extremely well in those and still was, very close run for the French elections.
Well, let's start with Europe. And there's different situations in each country, but there are similarities. Your first base in Europe is this massive migration of people from Africa, mostly Islamic, but not always. And when you introduce a vast number of people into any area like that, you are going to have a reaction. And that's the start of it. In terms of the farmers, of course, they've had a wonderful time. They're highly subsidised. The rationalisation that we saw in Australia, where it being much more productive, is not necessarily taking place on the same scale in Europe. And so suddenly there's a whole lot of carbon rules coming in there that they don't like at all. And superimpose on that the sort of social changes that are taking place in the community, gender changes and things of that sort. That's absolutely a magnificent cocktail to produce a right-wing extremism. And you saw in Europe back in the 20s and the 30s, particularly the 30s, where the problems that arose out of this peace agreement caused incredible problems in Germany, and you had a right-wing swing. And so you're seeing it happen. Europe will have to manage that. But do be aware that the community is not necessarily going along with this very big rise in migration, nor are they necessarily going along with the rise in energy costs that come from the decarbonisation. This is very much, certainly the second one, something that was done at the elite level of the community, not by those down further down. And so you get a backlash. When you get to the States, it really is quite much more focused, because there the migration is not Islamic at all, but it's still the same sort of thing. It's the Hispanics, and it's people coming up from the south of Mexico, very much encouraged by the Democrats, and that's caused problems in the place in much the same way as Europe. And of course, like other parts of the world, they're introducing environmental situations which are putting up the cost of energy. And Trump is going out saying, right, I'm going to go gas and oil, and we're going to have the lowest energy cost in the world. Drill, he says. And it looked as though he was going, and of course mix that with the migration, and he looked to have a winning lead. He may still have it, but it's certainly not the same. He had a president who has something akin to Alzheimer's. I don't know whether it was or not, but it is or not. But there's something wrong there, and I don't know what it is. But he certainly should never have stood for president. Trump's mistake was, don't kick him out until close to the election, because now he's got Harris, and she's a totally different problem, a different issue. She is pro-environmental, big time. She's partly responsible for the migrants being so big. She stuffed up the border. So here's a very different. The United States is actually choosing and having a referendum on environmental issues, and the Trump plan is to use the cheap energy in America to really ramp up manufacturing in America. Both parties will agree, both anti-China, but Trump will go further, about 90% tariffs. He'll use that to lower taxes. And so this is a very different, this American election, you say about lots of elections, these decide different things, but this one certainly does. If Trump gets in, the world environmental movement, as we've been describing, and we're talking about in Australia, will not be the same. We're going to have to start to think differently. I'm happy to talk about that later. But it is a pivotal election as to what takes place. But the right-wing extremism is there, of course, in exactly the same way. Anti-migration, anti-cost of energy costs, and the same things we talked about in Europe. American farming, of course, is more efficient, but it is, and we're going to see these things. In Australia, what's made it worse here, our swing, and will make it worse, is that for some unknown reason we decided not to teach our kids to read and write. and I'm happy to talk about that at some point in time, but you can imagine that superimposed on all the things I've just talked about is mainly males, a whole raft of males who can't read and write properly, can't get proper jobs, and they're going to go into Nazi parties, if you like. Right-wing parties, they can go left-wing parties too, but it is... any country that does that is going to suffer in some form or other. I'm not quite sure to what extent that is a problem in America and Europe, but it certainly is here. And by the way, sometimes you'll think I'm a bit of a right-winger myself, but there's Jason Clare, who is actually ignoring the teachers, ignoring all the people that want to teach them how to read and write, and standing up for that plan. And full marks, we have not had an education minister of that calibre on either side for 20 years.
So we'll come back to something like that in a little bit, but yeah. Let's throw ourselves back into Europe for a second, or into the US. I mean, in your observation of the sort of political economic sphere, progressive policies work when people feel like they are rich, right? People will let these things go through when they feel there is abundance and they've got jobs and they're not worried about cost of living. We are at the tail end of high interest rates for a long time. So you imagine that people who are going, I'm struggling now, I'm looking for someone to blame for what I'm going through. I'm going to say it's these progressive policies, and that's where you can sort of open a wedge for, you know, I'm going to have a go at the environment, or I'll have a go at immigrants and that sort of stuff. If the conditions in Europe or America improve, well, question one, if there's a reduction in economic prosperity in the US and Europe, will we see more of these people kind of being angry? Or, you know, have they sort of let the steam off and that's going to be okay?
Let's start with America. I talk to quite a lot of American business people, and they're telling me it's slowed down considerably. There has been a considerable slowdown in the US, and you will get a reaction back. And that's what Trump, whether the reaction back is strong enough for Trump's lower energy and carbon, I don't know. But that election is being held in a slower American economy, without any doubt at all. And of course, that's why there's a possibility of lower interest rates, because that's starting to come through. And the American situation is a bit different to Australia, where I'll come back to that later. But there is a slowdown there, and of course the same thing is in Europe. And these environmental policies that have not been properly thought out and put the cost of energy higher when everyone says it's going to go down, incorrectly saying that, that is not sustainable in a long-term society. You can get away with it for a while. And so I would say that if Harris gets in the States and pushes the energy prices a lot higher, there will be a riot in the States of some magnitude. If that's what she does. Trump will have his riots in a different area, but not that area. And in Europe, it's a more complex situation with energy there, because you tell me about the Russian gas. I think the big thing we've now worked out in most countries of the world, that gas is important and can replace coal and similar things, and that nuclear is the longer term exercise, and that's coming all over, and so we're now just beginning to start sensibly to think about this business of carbon reduction, and that's what we should have done at the start. What we did at the start was a few social people said, if we put a windmill up, it won't cost any money for the energy. It just blows around, you know. Well, it's just nonsense. And you need backups when the wind doesn't blow, and you need a whole lot of other things as well when you use just simply wind and solar. And the rest of the world is gradually waking up to that. But it's waking up to it in a sensible way. But if we were to continue along those lines, any country that does that is going to have a lot of trouble.
We'll ask you about the European farmer protest that we saw in Europe relatively recently. So amongst a number of issues, but one of the ones they were quite worried about was some of the quite severe rules around sort of carbon emissions and the like And as a result of those blockades that took place in many cities across Europe, the European Parliament took out some of the wording around how steep the carbon reductions would have to be for European farmers. I was wondering whether that actually was the first instance where you see these kind of regulations actually hit people at the grassroots level. Because up until then, all of the rules that we're looking at are affecting corporations, and corporations can pass those rules down through the supply chain and make farmers comply with those regulations, and the farmers will not contest what their buyer wants, right? It would be, you know, killing your customer. So, but for the European farmers, they were the ones who were saying, actually, you know what? I don't like this, and European government, you need to change these rules because that directly affects me rather than it's coming through the supply chain. Do you think that's the first of a number of protests that might end up happening as a result of these rules getting passed down to the grassroots level?
I think that in the case of the European farmers, because they're well subsidised and there's lots of them, they have power that you don't see in Australia, for example, because they're all there and they have a much greater presence in the total countries. Here in Australia, the farmers are much more remote. Once upon a time, we sort of knew all about them through elders and Dalgety and people like that, but as they sort of disappeared a bit, it's much more remote. They don't have the same power. So, yes, that was the situation. I think that communities will not put up with continuing rises in energy costs. They have now woken up that this is artificial, and there are better ways of doing it. We haven't gone as far advanced here, but they're certainly waking up in Europe, and you're seeing the decline in use of electric cars. What's this all about? In America, we're going to have a referendum on, of course. The American election will be in part a referendum on carbon, and whether we should go hard on carbon and reduce be more liberal with carbon, and reduce our energy costs, or the reverse. So that, in many ways, that may well decide what happens next globally, because there's no way, shape or form, if the US substantially reduces its energy costs, the rest of the world can go off there and put them up. Sorry, it's just not going to happen. And what that will, in a country like Australia, we're going to have to start to plan it. We're going to want to reduce our carbon seriously. You've got to start to think about how you do it. And we're not doing it at all. We're just, why don't we have a few wind farms here and no thought of cost whatsoever. Which, let's start on diverting. But the point is, this debate is only just starting. And it's going to be held in the States to start off with. That'll be a big debate. And the Americans will decide which way they want to go. And if they go with Harris, then the world is going to go to a lower carbon situation. It will not stop. But I think the cost of living will inhibit the current sort of policies that you're seeing in Australia. In Europe, I think they're starting to wake up. They may actually manage it better. They're starting to think about the situation more seriously than we do. And you have to, I'm diverting, but it's really important. What we've done in our societies, and I'm talking Australia now, and I think it applies right across the board, we've said to our large companies, and most of our enterprises, okay, we want gender equality, we want diverse race people in corporate, that's okay, and all that sort of stuff. And that's good, that's okay. But what we didn't realise is that all these people live in the same place, in a city or the environmental ring around those cities. And we determined, we saw that in the Aboriginal referendum. We saw the yes vote was in inner city and the ring around. But 60% of the country voted the other way in electoral terms. And what we've discovered is that the people who are running these companies, they all backed yes because they were in the inner city or the ring. And even though they might have different races and different genders and all that sort of stuff, they had the same view. There was no diversity. And that is something that corporate Australia only just started to wake up to. That they've actually, in getting diversity, they've killed diversity, if you think about it. and 60% of the population went a different way. Now that is something that, when you transpose that situation, it'll be very similar in the other countries too, in Europe and America. As the debate goes on, and if Kamala Harris wins and she puts up the energy prices as a result of that, you'll see the Republicans go bananas. It will become a huge issue. And in a different way, with the Europeans, what they can do is they say, oh, well, we'll put the levels at this level, and so you Australians, you can't export to that market. We'll cut you out using that as a quota. And they'll find ways of doing that to satisfy the farmers. They'll insulate the market or keep Australia out. They're the sort of things Europeans do.
Interesting about Kamala Harris, though, she's now ahead in the polls in quite recently. We probably will see interest rate cuts in America before the election, which would also be supportive of Bidenomics and sort of take some of the pressure off in terms of the policy there. The problem the interesting thing out of America, that if she does win, there is no effective opposition in the Republican Party because it's the party of Trump. And if he loses, there is no one who would be the spokesperson who would fight against this. So in some ways, you could imagine that a lot of green policies that would be part of the Biden/Harris administration will probably get rubber stamped all the way through quite quickly.
Probably will. But remember that the business community, again, I'm sitting down with US business people, and do they want Trump to get in? Like, even Musk, we know what he thinks of Trump, but he wants him in. And he's got that X network, and he'll use that, not just assuming Trump loses. It'll still be there. So what you have is a business community that does not want Harris in, or large segments of it anyway. They can see a boom in the States coming. Like, it's going to be quite something, because they're actually going to just, with low energy costs and tariffs and lower taxes, we're going to see enormous investment in the States. And there'll be some prosperity, and they can see it. So they mightn't like Trump. That's a totally different issue. Don't confuse what you think of Trump with that, with what affects your business. So you might be right about the Republicans. They won't have the strength. They'll be knocked around. But the business community, when it starts getting hit by tariffs, will move in behind that Republican Party in some way, shape or form, and it will develop. But it depends because she might be smarter than we think. Harris might, in fact, be very intelligent in the way she handled the environmental situation and do it skillfully. We really don't know.
Let's go to Australia. So talk is that there might be an election as early next year. Sort of how do you see the political landscape in Australia? And obviously Dutton's now moved ahead of Albo in the polls. How do you sort of see the landscape here in terms of the kind of reforms or the kind of policies that are going to affect farmers and how that might change in an election?
I want to take you, before I go to the election, I want to tell you what's happening in the business community as I see it. And you then move to the political situation. What we had in Australia up until, I'd say, mid-July, was for the most part, the 70% of the people who are not mortgage or rent stressed were keeping it going pretty well. Up and down a bit, but not too bad. And certainly June was fantastic. So these people were spending. Sometimes they'd cull back a bit, but then they'd come back again. Newspapers, for example, had a marvellous time because they want to travel. All these travel ads, they've got money. These people, there's a lot of people out there with money. And if you've got a business that can tap it, that's great. What's happening now is that they're getting nervy. They're not happy. So that's 70% in all states except two. Button, the wallets of it. In the two states, you don't have to work how they are. One's Western Australia, where they tell you what they're doing with all their money, and South Australia, which is booming. And so they're the two states that are doing well. Victoria's having the hardest time, and New South Wales is down as well. And then you look at the employment figures, and there you get a story. And once you understand the employment figures, you can see how it all fits together. You saw those figures. Just leave the unemployment rate aside. 58,000 jobs are created. 58. And the companies, because it's slowing down, they're looking to sack people and retrench people and cut their costs and do this to technology. And yet there's 58,000 jobs. How did that happen? And something like $400,000 of people have been jobs being created over, say, the year or two. Where? What's happened? Why in a slowdown are all these jobs being created? And again, it's a unique situation I've not seen before. Something like 80% or 83% of the jobs are being created in industries and businesses that are either government departments or dependent on government money. So it doesn't have to be, you don't work for the government necessarily, but government money is providing the revenue, or part of thereof. And in the last year or so, government outlays, states and federal combined, have gone up about 11%. It's an enormous increase. The governments are pouring money in, creating this employment, absolutely thwarting what the Reserve Bank's trying to do. They are just two different things, right? And so the Reserve Bank is looking at this and saying, my God, it's not just Chalmers, but he's bad enough, but it's all the states as well. And when you get to Victoria, by Jove, they're good at it. So the Reserve Bank is saying, well, we're going to hold interest rates steady for 6 months. We might even think of raising it. But, so that's an unsustainable situation because in totality the governments are creating enormous pain, about 30 to 40% down there. And now the people at the top have cut back because they don't like the look of this thing. So that is a dangerous situation. And then we come to an event that never has been attempted by any country in the world that I know of. That's Australia talking about. And in the middle of all this, right in the middle of it, the government decides to establish a Bible for business activity. It's a 700-page Bible, 700 pages of legislation, which is the Industrial Relations Act, which affects every single person in this room. There's nobody who will not be hit by this. And it reduces our productivity. It aims to reduce the productivity and to achieve it. And just take one little bit of it, one tiny bit of it, and it just gives you the feel for it. How can we give a bit of harm here? Well, wouldn't it be a good idea to put up transport costs and lower productivity? So this is how we do it. The efficient transport groups are the independent truckies. They're the safest, it's their own truck and family businesses. We changed the rules to what most of them have gone. And their activities are conducted by a cartel between the unions and the big corporations with a whole lot of new rules. And my mates tell me that puts the cost of transport in Australia up 10%. And that's legislative 10%. And that's a good start, isn't it? And that just keeps going. This and that. You're a local farmer. Farmer's got 20 people in the place, right? Got to be a union delegate. No telling him to go and milk down now. No. It is. Everyone's got to have a union delegate. And once you've got more than 15 people, by the way, if you know a farmer that's got more than 15 people on his or her staff, that goes to go down to a CFMEU to be taught how to hit you and hit you hard. Trades law it is. Sometimes it's CFMEU, sometimes it's not, but it's the trades law, and it's designed to bring conflict into every single enterprise, particularly with those unfortunate enough to have 15 people or more. If you've got one, it's not so bad, but and up to 15, you don't have to send them away for training. They can be trained online, that's not so bad. But again, they're trained, that reduces productivity, as it's designed to do. And we're doing that at a time when we think we want to raise low interest rates. So politically, what does that mean? It means that if the impact of this may take time, The smarter unions will wait and not implement. And there's debate in the union movement, should we go now and hit them hard, or should we wait till after the election? And we don't quite know how that's going to work out. In the transport area, do they wait or do they go now? We're not sure. If they start to attack and use these powers early to lower productivity and increase costs, then I think Malbo's in trouble. If they do nothing, it just sort of sits there as a blob. And what are you worrying about? No, nothing's happened at all. That will be important. In the case of the energy situation, the Liberals are going to put out they say, I don't know what they're going to do, I don't know, it's not a subject. They say they're going to put out a very detailed energy plan, which will involve wind and will involve solar. But it will also involve coal and nuclear, and it will clearly involve gas, and it'll involve all the other things as well. And that'll be the first thing that no one's ever put a plan up before. You'd think it would be successful, but probably won't, because it'll be attacked by people who say we should just simply go wind and solar. I might say that both in New South Wales and Victoria, the emissions are at absolute record levels, particularly Victoria because of that brown coal where rip out of that as hard as it can go. Why? Because the wind didn't blow. The wind didn't blow. And we're running a country on that basis. Wind doesn't blow, we have to blow out. And these are old coal power stations, they're going to fall over in the end. We've got immense gas reserves on the east coast, immense, particularly in Victoria, onshore. And you know what we're going to do in New South Wales and Victoria? Just by way of, we're going to put offshore wind farms that is going to produce wind power costs unheard of in this country. The debate about nuclear is rubbish. Nuclear is far cheaper on any basis than these things. But then you get a thing called the CSRO has become a political tool. And it's saying, this stuff is mathematically wrong. And they refuse to talk to the nuclear heights people who tell them what we're correct. Don't talk to them. We're playing politics. And yet we're a scientific body. So this is a very different and interesting debate. I have no idea who's going to win. It's even now. You'd have to say that in terms of the nation, we do need a proper energy policy. And we're not going to get that from the ALP, I don't think. Bad luck, we said. We have got a good education. Claire's a good education operator. Wong's not bad in foreign affairs either. Jim, he does his best. But he's surrounded by stronger people. And he, therefore, he's caught with these policies that are pushing up the prices of things. And there's Michelle Bullock. I think the lady's got a bit of strength. I'm not sure about that, but it's too early to tell. But everything tells me that was a bad appointment. Put someone strong in there is not what you want at all if you're a politician. but it's good for the country. And so Albanese is a better salesperson than Dutton. He's good at it. And Dutton is okay. But it'll be a nation-changing event. But not as big as the US. The difference between the parties in Australia is much less than it is in the US. And we want to just say one more thing about our national unity. The French submarine project was a total and utter fraud. Nothing, a con man job. When the submarine was announced, Malcolm said one thing and the French president said something totally different. And they then sacked all the people that Australia had been talked to, and the French was right. The Australians. It was a fraud. We changed it and we put in AUKUS. And in old times, you would have seen the ALP go the other way, and they didn't. They developed the policy and they stayed with it. And that's a fantastic thing for our nation. In this very important area, both parties head in the same direction. Maybe different, but the same direction. And that's good. So it's not all bad, but I must say to you that we have the sad part about that is that on defence, all the money's going to go to AUKUS, and we have no other defence. And the world is totally transformed in technology of defence. That's not the subject. But it shall be a close election. I can't tell you who's going to win. But there are some of the issues that will come if the industrial relations impact starts to hit earlier. The unions go before the election. Dutton wins.
Robert, just to sort of look at this from a media perspective for a second. So, obviously, you've been in the industry for a very long time, and media's been through obviously very difficult times in terms of its revenue. How are these issues being covered now? Do you feel like that sort of the way that a lot of these issues get approached has changed? Do you feel like a lot of medias get caught up in sort of culture war type stuff rather than sort of analysing the issue because of the fact that media has been sort of so reduced in terms of its revenue or its workforce? What do you give some context, people, about how to think about the media?
What I do, and I survived doing this. This is my retirement job, and basically vast areas of the media area are in what we call rounds. Farm writers, defence rounds, police rounds, state politics rounds, federal politics rounds, and so on and so on. Right? And the people involved in those rounds have as their source of information the Defence Department, Environmental Department, the police, and so on and so on and so on. And so they tend to be writing about the round, and in a way that normally accords with the way their informants think, which use the Department of Defence, the police, the same people, right? And that means that the issues outside the rounds, or the implications of what are happening within those rounds, are often ignored. Now, there's a number of journalists and all the publications that go outside that, but it's a very wide field. I find myself being able to write about industrial relations because no one else covers it. In the next step, I tell you what's happening, but not, hey, that transport thing. They don't tell you about the Amazon clause. I'll tell you about some of them, especially dying to help our Amazon. They don't tell you about all the other things, and it keeps going. Superannuation, tax, medium family business tax, defence. Not so much defence is actually being covered better now. There was a time when, the fraud, I had that fraud myself. I kept writing about this darn fraud and no one was to write about it. Amazing. How did that be? I don't know. They weren't doing the job. And so that's, in my view, the weakness. The second thing is happening in our media, which is difficult. Advertising in the past has been directed towards mediums. Magazine advertising, television, radio, print, magazines, and all that sort of stuff. Gradually, it's now moving to customer bases. And that makes free-to-air television in a lot of trouble because they don't know who their customers are. The streaming services will take a lot of the sport. And so how newspaper and media organisations handle that situation will determine their prosperity and future. And every single media organisation knows about this, and they all have strategies which may or may not work, but that's a big change. The great thing is that people will buy content now. We thought the newspapers did die, but my digital audience, people are coming in, they pay for it. And not just me, it's just Australia. But I'm part of it. And that wasn't always the case. Now they will. So that will be our media industry will be turned upside down by that basic change I've just described. And not everybody's going to win, but some will. And it'll be those that handle it well.
I'm going to do two lightning questions, and I'll give my microphone to George after that to go and if he wants to ask some questions from the floor. Quickly, how are farmers perceived, or how is the ag sector and the farming sector perceived at the editorial level, high editorial level in Australian newspapers? That's question one. And what do they think of that sector? And two, another one is, do you expect that we're going to see a backlash at a corporate board level against some of these environmental targets that they now possibly are thinking they cannot meet?
First of all, in the farm area, I don't think the farmers, they've lost touch with the majority of the population. You know, we think nicely, we see the farmer and the Coles ad or the Woolworths ad, and what's that all about, you know? And the farmers have let it go. The European farmers are much smarter than the Australian farmers in that area, bigger too, of course. And that's something that the farm investment sector and that whole sector it brims with stories that can be actually put out into the marketplace. But it doesn't happen. And they tend to be congregated in this and that. And it's something that... and the beauty of it is that if the farmer sector actually wants to get involved in that whole exercise, you don't have to just simply do it through the newspapers and television stations. There's a whole variety of things you can do. You can get out there and you don't. And it's there for you to do and you don't do it. And in the farm sector, as a journalist, well, you know, you write about your normal things. Look, what's the biggest 2 farm stories that aren't covered? Just think about it for a second. 1, why did the Olympic people want to eat meat? What's that mean? And secondly, why do we throw out all that food from our supermarkets? And why is it that the farmers pay for that? Why? Not price gouging, that's got nothing to do with it. It's because the supermarkets haven't invested in the distribution system. And you guys haven't written about it. And they're your poor old farmers. They've paid the cost, particularly the smaller ones. They've paid the cost for the not proper. If you have a proper transport system with refrigeration, you don't have to throw as much refrigerated stuff out. They haven't done it. Don't have to because the smaller farmers get on the chin.
Corporate backlash against these kind of new targets or corporate.
That will happen when the profits start to fall. And they haven't started yet because the demand has been there, you see. But they are getting tighter now. And you have to understand that late August 2024 is totally different to 6 months ago. The market has the 70% of people that not by mortgage or rent stress have cut back their spending. They're still travelling, by the way, but they've cut back the other areas, and that's affecting people. And if that keeps up, will they jump around? Yeah, they'll do that right. Yeah.
Great. We'll now take some questions from the floor. If you wouldn't mind just mentioning who you are and where you're from, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Robert, Cole Medway from LAWD. I now know how my daughter felt at the Taylor Swift concert with me being here with you today. As my daughter only has followed Taylor Swift for 10 years, but I can put 30 down for you. But and it's great to hear. But I was at the ECA breakfast, which many of you might have been last week, put on by the Queensland Rural Press Association, and Dave Harris from AACO spoke about the attacks that agriculture is getting from the wider public about our existence and our existence to just produce food. I'd just be interested in your thoughts on what we need to do as an industry to ensure that we can withstand those attacks, but also, tell our story, because it appears that we're not cutting through.
No, they're not. By the way, our Anglesey place was turned into a communication sector to get tickets for Taylor Swift. We got them. Not for me, granddaughter. And her friends. Look, you're not there. And it's. I don't think you've even described the situation in its total seriousness. You have a political party that's captured a large area of the young people, a hard-left party that wants you out of the way, particularly in meat. and you're just sitting back and watching it. You've got to get in there. It's got to be more than just the farmers. And as I said to you before, what a wonderful thing! Why was it that the athletes wanted the meat? What was in that meat that they needed for nutrition and for health? What is put into these vegetable products, the vegetable patties? My wife must have read this stuff, and she says, "No, I don't buy the vegetable patties because there's something in them. I don't know what it is, but it must be bad." And what are you not talking about that for? The sort of revolution in farming and all the things that happen with it, you're just letting it go. And part of the reason is this: industry bodies never work because, sorry, industry bodies, but it's hard work because they fight each other and they're up. But you see the elders and the Dalgettis who do that for you once upon a time, and they're in the cities and they knew the capital cities. They're not there now. There's no one there. But the point about it is that you need people who understand the social media game, who understand how you play all these different mechanisms to get messages out, like the Greens do. But don't underestimate the threat. The Greens are after your scalp, and they're going to try and get rid of you. The food, we'll get that somewhere else, doesn't matter. It's a laugh if you want. But this is now a very coordinated left-wing party, going far beyond carbon. It goes into all sorts of issues. You look at some of the things they're advocating. They're disasters, in my view, but they're popular. And so, yeah, you've got a chance. And you're going to have to start to mobilise the investment community. You're going to have to start to mobilise a whole lot of people and start to strategically think about it. And not simply blame this or that or that, but start and look at the assets you've got. Look at what works. And you've got to think about things like the Olympics, but not just that, other things too, and use them. And you can do it. And it is unfortunately, the total media is like the corporate boards. They come from the same place. And so they tend to have a different sort of view, but it's not necessarily pro-farm view. So you don't necessarily, it's just the way it is. The beauty of all these different media outlets and different ways and things, you can get around all that now, but you've got to do it. And if you don't, by the way, the farm business will get affected and we'll have less food. We'll get it from China.
Very good. We're slightly pushed for time, so I think we'll have to pull it up there. Have a good weekend and we'll see you soon. See you.